Hi, my name is John, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to do a brand new 2025 movie review, Dead Mail, and it's a Shudder exclusive. Dead Mail is directed by Joe DeBoer. This movie stars John Fleck as Trent, Sterling Macer Jr. as Josh, Sean Heyman as Brooks, Tomas Boykin as Jasper, Nick Heyman as Renee, Susan Privier as Bess, and Mickey Jackson as Anne. The basic overview is a post office employee investigates the mysterious origins of a blood-stained note that was sent by a captive man. Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and all that jazz. I'm a relatively new station and trying to get up to 50. Thanks! Okay, wow. This one is definitely different, definitely interesting, but it is a straight to streaming, and I can kind of understand why. So let's dive into this one. This movie gave me vibes of a movie that I just discussed recently, and it was the #1 on my most disappointing of 2024. And that movie is Longlegs, which within Longlegs, I compared that a lot to The Silence of the Lambs. Well, if The Silence of the Lambs is the top, and Longlegs is kind of a copycat, well, Dead Mail, that one is just the dollar store version of Longlegs. Now, don't get me wrong about Longlegs. I think Longlegs is a very competently made movie. It had a lot of hype last year, and it was mostly deserved. Me Strange Darling vibes a little bit as far as, okay, so this wasn't told in chapters like Strange Darlings, but it was told out of order like Strange Darlings, and it kind of gave that same confused element that was going on, except for, see, Strange Darlings did it very well. The way the chapters were mixed up, the way the story got told to us, but versus the way it occurred. At the end, it came together all really well. With this one, it gets a little confusing, and honestly, it's because they don't even say that they're doing chapters. Not that they did chapters specifically, but the movie's going along in one direction, and then all of a sudden it kind of backtracks, and there's nothing that tells you that they've backtracked, except for eventually, because of what you're seeing, because of who's where and what's what, you figured out, wait a second, they've kind of been backtracked for the last 15 minutes. So how do I explain that? Well, let me start off by saying this one's going to be a full spoiler. And it just so I can kind of explain it. And I got to use my notes here because there's multiple characters in this one, and even though some of them are kind of small, they all do play a pivotal role. So in the opening scene, it starts off with a man who's trapped, and his name is Josh. He's trapped in a house, and they show him tied up, and he's crawling out the front door, and he's making his way to a mailbox with some sort of partial letter, or like a piece of paper, really. And he gets to the mailbox and drops the little note into the mailbox, but in the background you see someone panicking and running and chasing after him, and they're trying to stop this from going on. And that's the whole basic idea of the central thing that happens in this movie that drives the rest of the story. Next thing you know, the letter ends up at the post office. But because, okay, so this movie reminded me of a lot of movies that had to do with like the post office or mail, or just, you know, it was very random. Like back in the day, there was this movie Dear God starring Greg Kinnear, where it was this guy who worked in the post office, and he received all these letters, and they were written to God, and he answered them. And this is a great comedy. But when we were in the post office, I was like, this is kind of reminding me of that, because the first thing I'll say is these characters were down to earth. And I kind of like that they just look like everyday people. Almost everyone in this movie looked like just a general everyday person. And I like that aspect because we just watched that movie Drop, and in Drop, the two main stars are like beautiful, like model beautiful. And I'm like, these people are just so like you touch them, they might break. So anyhow, the letter finds its way to this guy named Jasper in the mail department. He is the person that's in charge of figuring out lost letters. So he is kind of similar to Greg Kinnear in Dear God. He works in the mail department and he deals with lost mail. But they show him briefly kind of tracing packages and letters and getting them fixed and sent off to the right place. So that was, I mean, that was a pretty neat little tidbit about the post office. I was kind of strange to see that in this process, how they kind of open up letters and get into the mail to try and figure out the correct destination. I thought, isn't that kind of breaking their own rules? Because you're not supposed to mess with the mail. You're not supposed to open mail. But I guess if you work for the post office, you can go in people's mail. I don't know. I just thought that was strange. It's just a random weirdness about this movie. Like, what if people are writing like really personal, private stuff, and the post person, the person who plays Jasper is like reading a letter. So Jasper is going over this letter, and it is clearly a cry out for help, and it's like, oh, okay. And at this point, I thought, all right, this is gonna kind of get good. I mean, it's a little generic, but it's like, all right, this guy's gonna investigate, and he's gonna track down the guy, you know, locked up in the house, and it's gonna be, you know, pretty standard serial killer type of hostage situation. Anyhow, it kind of turns itself over not much further past this part. And I noticed that Jasper, even though this letter is kind of concerning, he kind of delays around about it. He kind of hem-haws around about. They show him going home, and he lives in like this, it's kind of like a halfway house, or maybe like a house for, it's for men only, and I guess it's men who are trying to get independent, or maybe they were homeless or had failures in their life, and they come to this place to live to get back on their feet. And the whole idea of it is Jasper is staying in the one room, and he has the bunk below him is open, and I'm like, why are we getting into all this when we're like, what's going on with the letter? But it turns out there is a point behind all us learning all this. The reason is, it's like, I guess it's like the next day, and Jasper's going home again, and he comes to find out that at this house that he lives at, he's going to have a new roommate. He meets Trent at his halfway house. We'll just call it a halfway house. And Trent is, well, let me just start off by saying Trent is Dollar Store Longlegs. He is the antagonist in this movie, but I guess it's kind of jumbled up so you don't know it right away. I felt like I knew it, but I wasn't sure. So why do I call him the Dollar Store Longlegs? So the first reason, well, besides the fact that he's a killer and he's got someone held captive in his house, they show him in a scene in this very old, like late 60s, early 70s vehicle. And it kind of reminded me of the station wagon that was in Longlegs. And there's also a scene where he's driving in the car. And if you remember in Longlegs, let me see if I can recreate this. In Longlegs, the camera, you know, you see them driving, and it's like Longlegs is, you know, it's the same shot in this movie, except for it's like from a very weird angle. It's like from up here. It's like, but it's a very similar shot. It literally reminded me, there's your killer sitting in the front seat of a car driving and screaming at the top of his lungs. Boom. Right out of Longlegs. Anyhow, Trent manages to end up being roommates with Jasper, the post guy, and it's like, it's going out of order, so it's like, what was the point of that? But then we see the next day again, so now it's like, I guess a third day, and Jasper's at work again, and all of a sudden, here comes Trent, boom, out the blue, showing up at his job. And it had already established that a few of the employees that worked with Jasper, there was two girls, and The two girls were Anne and Bess, and I'm going to call them Dollar Store Harker and Dollar Store Clarice Sterling because they end up playing a similar role later on in this movie, getting down to the end of this crime. And then there is, I guess, the last name on this one is Brooks. And Brooks is like another male guy in this place. And he's kind of a creep. And literally, he was like one of those fodder characters I thought. As soon as I saw him, he was like the oddball in the group. He was kind of creepy. He was kind of moody, awkward. And as soon as I saw this character, I'm like, yeah, he's going to die. And, well, in fact, he's one of the characters that dies in the movie. But what happens is Trent busts into his Jasper's office. So we have Dollar Store Longlegs gets in there and he decides to try and find this letter and that he knows is there. And he knows that if this guy figures out the letter that he's going to realize that, oh, yeah, I got, Josh trapped in my basement. And we're going to get into why Josh is in his basement because that's another whole other weird concept. I mean, it was interesting, but it was strange as well. But he ends up whapping Jasper on the head, and Jasper's bleeding, and he bleeds out. And I thought, oh my gosh, wait, this is our main star. Why is he dying? I love Jasper. Jasper was like my favorite character in the beginning of this movie. He seemed like he was going to be our main guy. But no. Trent's got him. Dollar Store Longlegs gets him in the post office. And then the other guy, the creepy guy, comes in and he gets involved. And then Dollar Store Longlegs gets him as well. And then basically sets up this whole scene and frames the other guy at the post office. So when the cops get involved, it's all like, yeah, this post guy killed this post guy. Yeah, he went postal on him. And it was kind of a little flimsy with all of that, but let's just say the cops don't really have much of a role in this movie. They are really just very side parts. This is all about the postal employees and the two people back at Trent's ranch. So now they're going to get into how did Josh end up into this ranch. And it turns out that Trent and Josh met at Josh's job. And Josh is a guy who works with electric keyboards. And at first I thought maybe he was a keyboard salesman, but I think he's more like he's like someone who fixes keyboards or creates keyboards or makes sounds to add to keyboards. And that's kind of the whole thing of what goes down with Josh and Trent, and this is again weird because it doesn't make sense how Josh ends up back at this guy's house and then stuck there, because initially I thought, did Josh and him become roommates? Like, what's the time span here? Because it seems like when he first goes to this ranch that he's at will because they're working on a keyboard together. They're trying to create new sounds for a keyboard and they're going to, make money in this venture. But somewhere along the line, while Josh is staying at Trent's house, Trent locks him in the basement and then ties him up and puts him in the bathroom. So it's like, what? Like, how do we go from we're going to sell keyboards and invent a keyboard sound to this ain't going my way and I'm going to lock you up in my basement until I get my way? I mean, so it's the whole premise behind this, like, it's a great idea, but some of the pieces that they add to make this work, flimsy. And I guess it was at that point that I realized that we were jumping around in the story. But flash forward to current time, Dollar Store Longlegs goes back to the post office trying to clean up his mess. At one point, the two girls in this movie, one of them, we'll say Dollar Store Clarice, and she's the older one with the longer hair. She's kind of goofy, but she has a conversation with Dollar Store Longlegs in the post office. And then later on, these two women at the post office end up deciding that they're going to investigate this whole thing because they weren't so sure that Jasper's death was on the down low with the way the cops were investigating it and settling it. So they decided to play Clarice Starling and Lee Harker on this. And the younger one I'll call Lee Harker because she's the one that really takes the lead in trying to solve this case. And they end up going to the halfway house where Jasper was staying, and they're trying to investigate everything. And like the guy running the halfway house is like, oh, I can't give you much information, but he's like pointing them to this wall where all these pictures of the men who stay there are, and it has their names below. So they're going to start investigating this way. And of course, way over in one corner, you see a picture of Trent because he had stayed there one night, I guess, and I guess that made him a resident long enough to get his picture on the wall. And I thought, oh, they're going to solve this pretty fast because, you know, Dollar Store Clarice seen him at the post office the same day that Jasper was murdered. I mean, it should be an open and shut case here. I don't know how the police in this movie never even investigate this whole aspect. They never even come near Dollar Store Longlegs, ever. Also, at one point, another aspect that kind of made me think, is this a Strange Darlings thing? Not really a Strange Darlings thing, but it seemed like our main antagonist, Trent, is, you know, i.e. Longlegs, seems to be a little bit infatuated with Josh and also Jasper. And I thought, oh, is there some homosexual subtext going on with this? I mean, I just got that vibe. It never really follows that point through all the way at the end, but there's just a few parts where he just seems to be glaring at them a certain way, and parts where he's kind of looking at their picture and kind of putting his finger on them, and I'm thought, is this going to be a Strange Darlings moment? But at the end of the day, it seemed like there was just a lot of concepts in this movie, ideas, but they never really follow through with all their points. And we're going to get to how it ends, because Dollar Store Clarice and Dollar Store Lee Harker show up at the ranch. They trace it down. They get it narrowed down to 5, which I thought they should have had it narrowed down to 1 pretty quickly. But they get it narrowed down to 5, and they start investigating all these houses, and they finally show up at the right house. And, you know, this is where it kind of hits the climax. And she ends up, in a way, I guess, rescuing him. He gets out, and it was a very, I guess there, in a way, it does have an ambiguous ending. So with all that, I've pretty much told the whole story, spoiled almost the whole movie. Let's get into, you know, how I feel about it. I mean, the positives were, I did like the basic storyline. I thought it was intriguing enough, but where the negative creeps in is just how the whole thing was kind of executed. It was kind of very Dollar Store version of any serial killer movie. Another positive that I had was that I overall did like the majority of the actual characters when I looked at them individually. But none of them really had too much going on with them, like, in a deep way. I mean, I just felt like even the main antagonists, Trent and even Josh, have like this dynamic, and I thought, okay, maybe it's going to go somewhere, but not really. I guess overall I was very up and down with them. In parts of the movie I was very engaged, and I just like, oh, you know, this could be good. This could be a Shudder exclusive surprise. And then at other parts, I'm like, nah, this is really getting weird and awkward and not coming together right. So at the end of the day, this one is going to be a veggie burger as well. I felt like there was some good ideas. The basic storyline behind this was good. You know, it just barely gets the job done. And I did want to throw in there was also a scene where the post girl is in the vehicle driving, and there's a shot of her from the side. I thought, oh, that also happened in Longlegs with Lee Harker. So just a little tidbit. That's why I kept getting Longlegs. That's why I kept comparing this to Longlegs. It's just the basic storyline, similarities, just similar themes. You know, Longlegs is way better than this. And we'll just leave it at that. Thanks for joining me today.